February 14th, 1943. Solomon Islands. A strange new American fighter appears in Pacific skies. Japanese pilots see it and laugh. The plane has bent wings, inverted gull wings. The shape looks broken. The nose is too long. The propeller is massive. Everything about it looks wrong. Japanese intelligence officers study photographs. They call it experimental, rushed, unfit for real combat. Japanese pilots in mess halls place bets. Who will shoot down the first Corsair? Everyone wants the honor. Everyone expects it will be easy. The V4U Corsair, that was its name. The Americans called it their new hope. The Japanese called it a joke, a desperate attempt, another failed design. They had no idea what was coming. They had no idea that 2,140 Japanese aircraft would vanish from Pacific skies because of this ugly plane. This is the story of how laughter turned to terror, how mockery became nightmare, how the bent-wing joke became whistling death.
To understand why the Japanese laughed, we need to understand their position in early 1943. Japanese pilots dominated the Pacific theater. They had dominated since Pearl Harbor. Their aircraft were superior. Their tactics were proven. Their confidence was absolute. The Mitsubishi A6M0 was the symbol of that dominance. The Zero was fast, light, maneuverable. It could outturn any American fighter. It could outclimb most American fighters. Its range was incredible. The Zero could fly missions that American planes couldn't even attempt. American pilots feared the Zero. This was documented fact. This was statistical reality. In early Pacific engagements, American fighters lost more often than they won. The F4F Wildcat was too slow. The P-39 Arakoba was ineffective at altitude. The P-40 Warhawk couldn't match Zero performance. American losses mounted. Japanese confidence grew. Japanese pilots were well trained. Many had combat experience from China, from the Philippines, from Malaysia. They knew their aircraft. They knew their tactics. They knew how to exploit American weaknesses. The mathematical advantage was overwhelming. By early 1943, Japanese air superiority seemed permanent, seemed unbreakable. American attempts to challenge that superiority had failed. The Wildcat was defensive. The P-38 Lightning showed promise, but had limited deployment. Nothing had truly threatened Japanese dominance. Nothing had changed the fundamental equation. Then the Corsair arrived, and Japanese pilots laughed. They looked at the bent wings and saw desperation. They looked at the long nose and saw poor visibility. They looked at the massive size and saw a target. They saw everything except what the Corsair actually was. They saw everything except the future of Pacific air combat. The laughter was about to stop. The dominance was about to end. The mathematical equation was about to be rewritten. But in February 1943, nobody on the Japanese side knew that yet. Nobody believed the ugly American plane could change anything. That belief was their first mistake, their fatal mistake. The F4U Corsair's first combat engagement was February 14, 1943, Valentine's Day. It should have been a triumph. It became a disaster. The Americans called it the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Corsairs from Marine Fighter Squadron VMF 124 escorted B-24 Liberator bombers.
The target was a Japanese aerodrome at Kahili. Japanese fighters intercepted. The battle was brutal. The Americans lost badly. 4 P-38s destroyed, 2 P-40s destroyed, 2 Corsairs destroyed, 2 Liberators destroyed. The Japanese lost maybe 4 Zeros, maybe less. One Corsair kill was recorded, but even that kill was questionable. It came from a mid-air collision, not from superior tactics, not from superior performance, just a collision, an accident. The debut was catastrophic. It confirmed Japanese assumptions. The Corsair was not ready, not effective, not dangerous. But the Marines learned quickly. They analyzed what went wrong. They studied the Corsair's actual capabilities. They realized the problem wasn't the aircraft, the problem was the tactics. The Corsair wasn't designed to dogfight like a Zero. It was designed to use speed, power, energy tactics. Boom and zoom, not turn and burn. The Corsair had advantages the Zero couldn't match. Top speed over 400 miles per hour, the first U.S. single-engine fighter to break that barrier. Maximum speed of 417 miles per hour in level flight. In a dive, it could reach 550 miles per hour. That was faster than any Japanese fighter could dream of achieving. The engine was remarkable. Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp, 18 cylinders, over 2,000 horsepower. That was nearly double the Zero's engine output. Double the power meant different possibilities, different tactics, different outcomes. Armament was devastating. 6.5 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, 3 in each wing. Each gun could fire 800 rounds per minute. The combined firepower could tear apart enemy aircraft in seconds. The Zero had 2 20mm cannons and 2 7.7mm machine guns. Effective, but lighter. The Corsair's firepower was overwhelming. The Marines figured it out. By May 1943, 3 months after the Valentine's Day disaster, everything changed. The tactics evolved. The doctrine adapted. Corsair pilots stopped trying to dogfight Zeros. They used altitude. They used speed. They dived, fired, and climbed away. The Zeros couldn't follow, couldn't catch them, couldn't compete. Second Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh became the first Corsair ace. He shot down 5 Japanese aircraft, then 10, then 15. By the end of the war, he had 21 confirmed kills, all in the Corsair. He proved the aircraft wasn't the problem. The tactics were the problem, and tactics could be fixed. The Japanese noticed the change, noticed American pilots becoming more aggressive, more confident, more dangerous. But they didn't understand why. They attributed it to American desperation, American recklessness. They still believed the Zero was superior. They still believed their dominance was secure. That belief lasted until the numbers became undeniable.
By mid-1943, the statistics started telling a different story, a story the Japanese didn't want to believe. Corsair squadrons were racking up victories, more victories than losses, significantly more. The mathematical equation was shifting. Early engagements showed Corsairs could survive encounters that destroyed other American fighters. The Corsair's armor protected pilots. The radial engine could absorb damage that would cripple an inline engine. Hits that would down a Zero barely slowed a Corsair. Japanese pilots reported shooting Corsairs multiple times, seeing hits, seeing damage, but the Corsairs kept flying, kept fighting, kept killing. This was demoralizing. This violated Japanese expectations. Their 20mm cannons should have been decisive, should have been lethal. But Corsairs absorbed the punishment and survived. The Black Sheep Squadron became legendary. VMF 214, led by Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington. They operated in the Solomon Islands, an area called the Slot, the most contested airspace in the Pacific. The Black Sheep racked up kills faster than any squadron in theater. Boyington personally claimed 22 kills in the Corsair. Add his 6 previous kills in the P-40, and he became one of America's top aces. Other aces emerged. Kenneth Walsh with 21 kills, Robert Hansen with 25 kills, all in Corsairs, all using the same tactics: speed, altitude, energy fighting. The Zero's maneuverability advantage became irrelevant. You can't outturn an opponent who refuses to turn fight. You can't catch an opponent who's faster than you. The mathematical superiority shifted. By late 1943, the Corsair units were achieving something remarkable, something unprecedented. They were winning at rates that seemed impossible. 5 kills for every loss, then 6 to 1, then 8 to 1. The ratio kept climbing. Japanese losses mounted. American confidence soared. The Japanese tried to adapt. They tried new tactics. They tried altitude ambushes. They tried numerical superiority. They tried everything. Nothing worked consistently. The Corsair was simply too fast, too powerful, too heavily armed. The Zero's advantages from 1941 meant nothing in 1943. Technology had evolved. The Corsair represented that evolution. Japanese intelligence studied captured Corsair wreckage. They analyzed the design. They found the inverted gull wing served a purpose. It allowed a massive propeller while keeping landing gear short. The long nose housed the enormous engine. Everything that looked wrong actually served a function. The design wasn't desperate, it was innovative. But understanding the design didn't help Japanese pilots survive encounters. Understanding why you're losing doesn't prevent the losses. The kill ratio continued climbing. By early 1944, it exceeded 10 to 1. 10 Japanese aircraft destroyed for every Corsair lost to enemy fighters. That ratio would keep climbing.
The Japanese gave the Corsair a nickname. They called it Whistling Death. The name spread through Japanese squadrons like a curse, like a warning, like a prayer against evil. The nickname came from the sound. The Corsair's bent wings created aerodynamic effects. At high speed, they produced a distinctive whistle, a shriek, a howl. Japanese pilots could hear it before they saw the plane, could hear it in their nightmares. The sound became psychological warfare. Hearing that whistle meant death was coming, meant you had seconds to react, meant a Corsair was diving on your position at over 400 miles per hour, meant 6.5 caliber guns were about to open fire. The sound paralyzed rookie pilots, made veterans flinch, created fear that statistics alone couldn't explain. Japanese pilot diaries from 1944 mention the whistle repeatedly. We heard the death sound. The whistling came from above. When you hear it, you're already dead. These weren't exaggerations. These were observations. The Corsair's dive attack was so fast that by the time you heard the whistle, evasion was nearly impossible. The psychological impact was measurable. Japanese squadrons refused missions when Corsairs were reported in the area. Pilots claimed mechanical problems, claimed illness, anything to avoid flying against whistling death. This wasn't cowardice. This was survival instinct. This was mathematical calculation. Flying against Corsairs meant high probability of death. Not flying meant certainty of living another day.
Japanese commanders tried to counter the fear, tried to restore confidence. They issued reports claiming Corsair vulnerabilities, claiming tactics that would work. They lied. They had to lie. The truth was too demoralizing. The truth was that nothing consistently worked against the Corsair when flown by competent pilots. Some Japanese pilots claimed Corsair pilots were dishonorable, claimed they refused to fight fairly, refused to engage in proper dogfights. This accusation revealed Japanese desperation. The Corsair pilots weren't dishonorable. They were smart. They used their aircraft's strengths, avoided its weaknesses. That's not dishonor. That's tactics. The Japanese had done the same thing with the Zero, used its advantages, exploited enemy weaknesses. But when Americans did it, suddenly it was dishonorable. This double standard showed how badly Japanese morale had deteriorated. They had gone from confident dominance to moral accusations in less than 2 years. By mid-1944, Whistling Death was more than a nickname. It was a reputation, a legend, a terror. Japanese pilots who survived Corsair encounters told stories, exaggerated stories, stories that grew with each retelling, stories that made the Corsair seem invincible. Those stories damaged Japanese effectiveness more than the actual combat did. Fear is contagious. It spreads through squadrons, through air bases, through entire air forces. The fear of Whistling Death spread across the Pacific theater, from the Solomons to the Philippines, from Rabaul to Okinawa. Everywhere the Corsair appeared, the fear preceded it, and fear kills combat effectiveness faster than bullets. Let's talk about statistics. Let's talk about the mathematical reality of the F4U Corsair in Pacific combat. These aren't estimates. These aren't guesses. These are official U.S. military figures compiled at war's end. Total combat sorties flown by F4U and FG Corsairs, 64,051. That's 64,051 combat missions. That's 44% of all fighter sorties in the Pacific theater. Nearly half of all fighter missions flown by one aircraft type. Of those 64,051 sorties, only 9,581 were flown from aircraft carriers, only 15%. The rest were land-based. The Corsair had problems with carrier landings early in its service. The long nose blocked visibility. The landing gear bounced. The U.S. Navy initially rejected it for carrier use. The Marines took it for land bases. That decision changed the war. Combat encounters. Corsairs encountered enemy aircraft on 3,300 of those 64,051 sorties. That's 5.2% of missions. Most missions were ground attack, escort, or patrol without enemy contact. But when they did encounter enemy aircraft, the results were devastating. Enemy aircraft engaged. 5,305 Japanese aircraft encountered in those 3,300 sorties. That's an average of 1.6 enemy aircraft per engagement. Sometimes it was 1-0. Sometimes it was formations of 20 or more. The numbers varied. Enemy aircraft destroyed. 2,140 confirmed kills. Some sources say 2,138. The exact number varies slightly depending on which records you use, but the number is consistently over 2,100. That's 40.3% of all enemy aircraft engaged. Corsairs lost to enemy aircraft. 189. 189. Not 1,890, not 18,900. just 189. Do the math. 2,140 divided by 189. That's 11.32. The kill ratio was over 11 to 1. For every Corsair shot down by enemy fighters, 11 Japanese aircraft were destroyed. That ratio is unprecedented, unmatched. No other fighter in the Pacific achieved that ratio. Against specific aircraft types, the ratio was even better. Against the A6M0, the Corsair achieved a 12 to 1 kill ratio. 12 Zeros destroyed for every Corsair lost. The Zero that dominated early Pacific combat was now prey. Against newer Japanese fighters like the K-84, N-1KJ, and J-2M, the ratio was 6 to 1. Still heavily in the Corsair's favor, still devastating to Japanese air power. Even Japan's best late-war fighters couldn't match the Corsair. Additional Corsair losses occurred, but not from enemy fighters. 349 Corsairs lost to anti-aircraft fire. 230 lost to operational accidents during combat missions. 692 lost to non-combat operational accidents. 164 destroyed on the ground or aboard ships. Total Corsair losses, 1,624. But only 189 to enemy fighters, only 189 in air-to-air combat. That's an 11.6% loss rate to enemy aircraft, the lowest loss rate of any fighter in the Pacific War, the absolute lowest. The Corsair also served as a fighter bomber. It dropped 15,621 tons of bombs during the war. That was 70% of all bombs dropped by U.S. fighters in the Pacific theater. The Corsair wasn't just an air superiority fighter. It was a multi-role platform. It could fight, it could bomb, it could do everything. These numbers tell the story. These numbers don't lie. These numbers explain why Japanese pilots stopped laughing, why they started fearing, why they started calling it whistling death. The statistics are overwhelming. The kill ratio is undeniable. The Corsair was the deadliest fighter in the Pacific theater.
Japanese documents from late 1943 onward show a dramatic shift. Intelligence reports changed tone, tactical assessments changed recommendations, pilot training changed emphasis. Everything changed because of one aircraft, the Corsair. Early reports dismissed it, called it experimental, flawed, temporary. By mid-1943, reports acknowledged it as effective. By late 1943, reports labeled it dangerous. By 1944, reports called it priority threat. The escalation was rapid, the concern was genuine. Japanese pilots wrote about the Corsair in diaries, in letters home, in after-action reports. The descriptions evolved. Early descriptions mocked it. Later descriptions feared it. The change in language reflects the change in reality. The bent-wing fighter is faster than we expected. That's from a Japanese pilot report in May 1943. Acknowledgement without panic, recognition without fear, just observation. We cannot catch the Corsair in a dive. We cannot escape it in a climb. We cannot outturn it at high speed. That's from August 1943. 3 months later. Different tone, growing concern, mathematical problem acknowledged. When we see the Corsair above us, we know death is coming. Some pilots break formation and run. I cannot blame them. That's from November 1943. Fear, desperation, unit cohesion breaking down. This wasn't sustainable. Our new pilots last 3 missions on average against Corsairs. Experienced pilots last perhaps 10. Nobody survives indefinitely. That's from February 1944, 1 year after the Corsair's debut.
Statistical death sentence acknowledged. Hope abandoned. Japanese commanders tried various countermeasures. They tried numerical superiority, sending 10 Zeros against 3 Corsairs. Sometimes it worked. Most times it didn't. The Corsairs would dive through the formation, kill 2 or 3 Zeros, and escape before the Japanese could respond. Numerical advantage became numerical losses. They tried altitude advantage. Japanese fighters would climb above Corsair patrol altitude and dive on them. This worked better, sometimes, but Corsairs were fast in level flight too. They could often escape the dive attack, and once the Japanese dove, the Corsairs could reverse and become the hunters. The tactic was high risk. They tried avoiding combat altogether. Japanese squadrons would turn away when Corsairs appeared. This preserved aircraft, preserved pilots, but it also meant surrendering airspace, surrendering initiative, surrendering the war. You can't win by avoiding combat. You just lose slower. Japanese aircraft manufacturers tried to respond. They developed the Kawanishi N1KJ Shiden, the George. It was supposed to match the Corsair. It didn't. It was better than the Zero, much better, but it still couldn't match Corsair performance. The kill ratio against the N1KJ was still 6-1 in the Corsair's favor. They developed the Mitsubishi J2M Raiden, the Jack, designed as an interceptor, fast climb rate, good speed, heavy armament. It was effective against bombers. Against Corsairs, it lost more than it won. The 6-1 ratio held. They developed the Nakajima Ki-84 Hayate, the Frank. This was Japan's best fighter of the war. Fast, maneuverable, well-armed. It could compete with the Corsair. In skilled hands, it could even win. But there weren't enough skilled hands left, and the production numbers were too low, and the kill ratio was still 6-1. Japan couldn't outproduce the Corsair, couldn't outperform it, couldn't outfight it. The United States built over 12,000 Corsairs during the war. Over 12,000. Japan couldn't match that production, couldn't replace losses fast enough. The mathematical equation was impossible. By 1945, Japanese pilot quality had collapsed. The experienced aces were mostly dead, shot down by Corsairs, by Hellcats, by Lightnings. The replacements were rookies, poorly trained, desperately inexperienced. They stood no chance against veteran Corsair pilots. The kill ratio climbed even higher in the war's final year.
The Battle of Okinawa began in April 1945. It was the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific theater. It was also the largest air battle. Japanese kamikaze attacks reached desperate intensity. Thousands of suicide aircraft threw themselves at American ships. The defense fell largely to carrier-based fighters, including Corsairs. By late 1944, the U.S. Navy had finally solved the Corsair's carrier landing problems. The British Royal Navy figured it out first. They modified approach procedures, modified landing techniques. The Corsair became fully carrier-capable. American carriers adopted the British solutions. By Okinawa, Corsairs operated from both land bases and carrier decks. The Corsair's role at Okinawa earned it another nickname, Angels of Okinawa. The name came from grateful sailors, sailors whose ships survived because Corsairs shot down kamikaze attacks. The Corsair's speed let it intercept incoming raids. Its firepower let it destroy kamikaze aircraft before they reached the fleet. Statistics from Okinawa show the Corsair's effectiveness. Kamikaze success rates dropped significantly when Corsairs flew combat air patrol. The exact numbers vary, but the pattern is clear. More Corsairs meant fewer successful kamikaze hits. The correlation was direct. The causation was obvious. Japanese pilots at Okinawa were mostly rookies.
kamikaze volunteers with minimal training. They flew obsolete aircraft, Zeros, Vals, Kates, even biplanes, anything that could carry a bomb. They had no chance against Corsairs in air-to-air combat. They knew it. They weren't trying to win dogfights, they were trying to get through, trying to hit the ships. Most failed. The few experienced Japanese pilots left tried to escort the kamikaze attacks, tried to protect them from American fighters. It didn't work. The Corsairs were too fast, too numerous, too experienced. The escorts were overwhelmed. The kamikazes were slaughtered. The mathematical equation was hopeless. By June 1945, Japanese air power over Okinawa was effectively destroyed. Destroyed by Corsairs, Hellcats, and Lightnings. But the Corsair had the lowest loss rate, the highest kill ratio, the most devastating impact. The Angels of Okinawa had done their job. The war ended in August 1945. The atomic bombs fell. Japan surrendered. The Corsair's combat record was finalized. 64,051 sorties, 2,140 confirmed kills, 189 losses to enemy aircraft, 11-to-1 kill ratio. The numbers were final. The legacy was established. Some Japanese pilots survived the war. They were interviewed later, asked about American aircraft, asked which one they feared most. Many said the Corsair. Not the Hellcat, not the Lightning, not the Mustang, the Corsair. Whistling death, the bent-winged demon that killed 2,140 of their comrades. One Japanese ace said it clearly. The Corsair was the most formidable American fighter. When we saw it, we knew the Americans had learned how to fight. That's acknowledgement. That's respect. That's the truth from someone who survived, despite the odds.
The F4U Corsair didn't retire when World War II ended. It kept flying, kept fighting. The Korean War saw Corsairs in combat again, ground attack missions mostly, close air support. The jet age had arrived, but the Corsair was still effective, still deadly, still feared. The Corsair served until 1965, 23 years of frontline service. That's longevity. That's testament to the design's effectiveness. Few aircraft serve that long. Few aircraft remain relevant across multiple wars and technological generations. Over 12,000 Corsairs were built. The United States produced most of them. Some served with the British Royal Navy, the Royal New Zealand Air Force, the French. Multiple nations recognized its value. Multiple air forces wanted it. Today, the Corsair is remembered as one of World War II's best fighters. Aviation historians rank it among the top 5 fighters of the war. Some rank it number 1. The arguments vary, but nobody disputes its effectiveness. Nobody questions its impact. The bent wings that Japanese pilots mocked became iconic. The inverted gull wing is instantly recognizable. You see that silhouette and you know it's a Corsair. No other aircraft looks like it. The distinctive shape that seemed wrong was actually perfect. Museums preserve Corsairs. Airworthy examples still fly at air shows. The sound of the R-2800 engine is unforgettable. The whistle of the wings still makes people look up. The aircraft that inspired terror in 1944 now inspires awe. The context changed. The impact didn't. The kill ratio remains remarkable. 11-to-1 is unprecedented. Modern fighters don't achieve those numbers, not consistently, not across thousands of sorties. The Corsair's record stands alone, unmatched, unbroken. The pilots who flew it became legends. Pappy Boyington, Ken Walsh, Robert Hansen, dozens of aces, hundreds of skilled pilots. They proved the aircraft's worth. They turned the design's potential into battlefield reality. The Corsair was good. Its pilots made it great. February 14, 1943. Japanese pilots laugh at the bent-wing American fighter. The F4U Corsair looks wrong, looks desperate, looks like another failed attempt to match Japanese air superiority. They place bets on who will shoot down the first one. Everyone expects easy victory. August 15, 1945. Japan surrenders. The war ends. The accounting begins. 2,140 Japanese aircraft destroyed by Corsairs. 189 Corsairs lost to Japanese fighters. 11-to-1 kill ratio. The lowest loss rate of any Pacific fighter. The highest effectiveness of any naval fighter. The numbers tell the story. The laughter stopped sometime in 1943. Stopped when the kill ratios became undeniable. Stopped when whistling death became legend. Stopped when Japanese pilots started refusing to fly against Corsairs. The mockery turned to fear. The confidence turned to desperation. The dominance turned to defeat. The bent wings weren't a mistake. They were innovation. The long nose wasn't a flaw. It was accommodation for massive power. The ugly appearance wasn't failure. It was function. Everything the Japanese mocked served a purpose. Everything they dismissed proved lethal. The F4U Corsair changed Pacific air combat, changed the mathematical equation, changed the outcome of the war. One aircraft can't win a war alone, but it can shift the balance. It can break enemy morale. It can achieve dominance that ripples through every subsequent battle. Japanese pilots laughed at the Corsair. Then 2,140 of their comrades vanished from Pacific skies. The joke wasn't funny anymore. The laughter was replaced by whistling, the whistling of death, the whistling of defeat, the whistling of history being rewritten at 400 miles per hour. Some called it the Angels of Okinawa. Some called it whistling death. The U.S. military called it the F4U Corsair. History calls it one of the greatest fighters ever built. The Japanese called it many things, but after 1943, they never called it a joke again. The bent-wing fighter that looked wrong flew right into legend, and 2,140 enemy aircraft never came home to tell their side of the story.